Have you ever felt a presence you couldn't quite explain? You know, that feeling that maybe, just maybe, there's more between heaven and earth than we can see.
Or maybe you've wondered, is there really something beyond this life? Can we actually talk to those who've passed on?
Well, tonight on Forbidden Unveiled, we're taking a deep dive into the world of spiritualism. I'm your host, John Doe.
And I'm Jane Doe, resident expert on all things paranormal.
And Jane, we're not messing around tonight. We've got stacks of research, Catholic Encyclopedia, Wikipedia, even some fascinating stuff on Victorian spiritualism.
We're going to try to unpack this whole idea of communicating with the spirit world, for our listeners.
Exactly. So let's start with the basics. For someone who's maybe never even seen a ghost hunting show, what exactly is spiritualism?
It's the belief that the spirits of the dead can communicate with the living.
Okay, straightforward enough. But I got to ask, is spiritualism just another word for spiritism?
Good question. They often get used interchangeably, but they're not quite the same. Think of it like this. Spiritism, especially the kind codified by Allan Kardec, that's like a specific branch with its own distinct rules.
Right. Kind of like different denominations within a religion.
Exactly. But to really get spiritualism, we got to go back in time a bit, way before the whole modern spiritualist movement kicked off.
Okay, time travel it is. So where are we headed?
Back to the 18th century to meet Emanuel Swedenborg, this super fascinating guy who was a scientist, a philosopher, and a theologian all rolled into one.
Okay, Swedenborg. Now that's a name that definitely belongs on a paranormal podcast.
Right. He claimed to have all these visions and could actually talk with spirits while he was wide awake.
No trance, no spooky rituals, just casual chats with the other side. That's wild.
I know, right? And get this, he even claimed to have used his spiritual abilities to help out the Swedish royalty.
Whoa, so he was like the royal ghost whisperer.
Pretty much. But here's where it gets really interesting for spiritualism. Swedenborg wrote extensively about what he saw and learned in the spirit world. He described different levels of existence after death, almost like a spiritual map. And these ideas, they were huge for early spiritualists.
So Swedenborg was laying some serious groundwork, like the OG ghost influencer.
Yeah, you could say that. And then you can't talk about spiritualism without mentioning Franz Mesmer.
Oh yeah, Mesmer. That's the guy with all the magnets, right?
That's him. He was an Austrian physician who developed a technique that later evolved into what we know as hypnotism.
Animal magnetism. I remember reading about that.
Exactly. Now, his theories were pretty controversial back then, especially in the scientific community, but his work really contributed to this idea that by altering your state of consciousness, you might be able to communicate with spirits more easily.
Fascinating. So we've got Swedenborg mapping out the afterlife,
Yeah.
and Mesmer saying, hey, maybe we can use our minds to tap into that.
Yeah.
It seems like the stage is set for, well, a spiritual revolution.
It certainly was. And then along came these three sisters from upstate New York, the Fox sisters, and things really took off.
The Fox sisters, weren't they the ones who supposedly communicated with a ghost through knocking sounds?
That's right. Their story is considered by many to be the beginning of the modern spiritualist movement, but it's a story full of twists and turns.
Okay, now you got me hooked. Tell me more about these rapping sisters.
Okay, so imagine this. It's 1848, a small town called Hydesville in New York. It's 1848, a small town called Hydesville in New York, and these two young sisters, Margaret and Kate Fox, they start hearing these rapping sounds in their house.
Oh, so this is like a classic haunted house story.
Yeah, kinda. But they claimed these weren't just any random raps, these were messages like intelligent communication from a spirit.
A spirit, like a ghost.
Exactly. And rumor had it that the spirit might have been a murdered peddler buried right there under their house.
Okay, now that's creepy. I mean, creaky floorboards are one thing, but rapping ghosts, that's next level.
Right. And their story just blew up. People were traveling from all over just to attend their séances, to hear those spirit raps.
I bet that was huge news back then.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, imagine mysterious rapping sisters baffle experts. It must have been all over the newspapers.
I can just picture the headlines. So the Fox sisters, did they become like overnight celebrities?
Oh, yeah, instant sensations. But, fame can be kind of a double-edged sword, especially when you're dealing with the spirit world.
Yeah, there's always that element of skepticism, right?
Always. And in the case of the Fox sisters, it all came crashing down decades later.
Oh no, what happened?
Well, in 1888, they made a shocking confession. They admitted that the whole rapping thing, it was a hoax. They'd been making the sounds themselves using their toes and knuckles.
Wait, seriously? So they were just like cracking their knuckles and freaking everyone out.
Pretty much. Can you imagine the scandal? But then, get this, they later recanted that confession.
Oh, wow. So it's a confession and then a recantation.
Wow.
That's even more confusing.
Yeah.
What was the truth?
Well, they claimed they were pressured into saying it was a hoax.
Oh, man. So even to this day, we don't really know for sure what went down.
Exactly. It's a real head-scratcher. But here's the thing. Even with all that controversy, spiritualism didn't just disappear.
Really? I would have thought that whole hoax thing would have been the end of it.
Nope, it actually kept growing. In fact, it attracted all sorts of people, including a lot of social reformers.
Social reformers. Now, that's not what I expected. I always thought spiritualism was more about, séances and trying to contact dead relatives.
Oh, it was definitely about that too.
Yeah.
But a lot of early spiritualists were also really passionate about making the world a better place. They saw a connection between spirit communication and, social justice.
So they were fighting for things like, what, abolition of slavery and women's rights?
Exactly. They believed that these causes were aligned with their spiritual beliefs.
That's actually pretty cool. It's like they were channeling the spirit world for social change.
You got it. A great example of that is Asha W. Sprague. She was this amazing trance lecturer who used her platform to speak out against slavery and really advocate for women's rights.
It sounds like she was a real pioneer. So it wasn't just about spooky messages from beyond. It was about using spiritual guidance to, make a difference in the world.
That's a great way to put it. And it wasn't just social reformers who were drawn to spiritualism. Even some big names in literature and science got on board.
Really? Like who?
Well, for example, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes.
No way. Sherlock Holmes' creator was into spiritualism.
He was a devout believer. He even thought that Sherlock's detective methods could be applied to investigating the spirit world.
Wow, that's so cool. Imagine Sherlock Holmes on a ghost hunt.
Right. And then there was Alfred Russel Wallace, this brilliant scientist who actually co-developed the theory of evolution with Charles Darwin. He was also a huge supporter of spiritualism.
You'd think someone so into science would be a little skeptical. It's amazing to see how widespread the appeal of spiritualism was, crossing all sorts of boundaries.
And it wasn't just limited to the US and Europe. Spiritualism went global, taking root in all sorts of different cultures around the world.
Wait, so we're talking spirit mediums in Japan, seances in South America, that kind of thing?
Exactly. Each culture kind of brought its own unique spin to this whole idea that we can communicate with the spirit world. It's really fascinating how universal that desire is.
It makes you wonder what it is about that connection with the other side that resonates so deeply with people across cultures.
For sure. But speaking of different cultures, we got to talk about Victorian England for a minute. I mean, that whole era was obsessed with the supernatural.
Yeah, Victorian England, they were all about seances and ghost stories, weren't they? Didn't you say something about Queen Victoria herself being into spiritualism?
Oh, she totally was. Seances were like the hottest social events back then, especially among the upper class. And rumor has it that Queen Victoria held seances to try to connect with her deceased husband, Prince Albert.
Oh, that's kind of sweet, actually.
Yeah.
She just wanted to chat with her hubby again.
Right. So Victorian spiritualists, what did they believe? Well, they were really big on this idea that spirits continue to develop even after death. They believed how you behaved here on Earth would affect your progress in the afterlife.
So, being a good person mattered, even after you died.
It was a big deal. And they also believed that spirits could offer guidance on all sorts of things, from personal dilemmas to those big social issues we were talking about earlier.
So it was more than just getting spooky messages. They actually sought advice from the spirit world.
Exactly. Okay, are you ready for the juicy details about those famous Victorian seances?
Oh, absolutely. Give me all the spooky details.
All right, picture this. Dimly lit rooms, flickering candles, a table draped in velvet. It was all about creating this atmosphere of mystery and anticipation.
So was it all Ouija boards and crystal balls?
Well, those came later. Back in the Victorian era, they were more into things like table tipping. So everyone would put their hands lightly on a table and then wait for it to move or tilt, supposedly guided by spirit energy.
I've heard of that. So, the table would actually move.
That's the idea. And then there was automatic writing. The medium would go into a trance and let the spirits control their hand to write messages.
Wow, that sounds intense. Were there any other methods they used?
Oh, yeah. For the really adventurous, there were even attempts to materialize spirits. sometimes using this weird substance called ectoplasm.
Hold on, ectoplasm. What in the world is that?
It was this mysterious gooey stuff that some mediums claimed to ooze during séances. They believed it was a physical manifestation of spirit energy.
Okay, now that sounds a little, hard to believe.
Right. A lot of skeptics thought it was just cheesecloth or egg whites or something.
Yeah, I can see how ectoplasm might raise a few eyebrows. But even with all the skeptics, it's clear that spiritualism was huge in Victorian England. It's like everyone was dying to peek behind the curtain and see what was on the other side.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? This era, known for its scientific advancements, was also totally obsessed with the supernatural. And that tension between belief and skepticism, that's a big part of what defines the history of spiritualism.
Totally. So we've got the Fox sisters kicking things off, social reformers using spirit communication to fight for a better world, big-name intellectuals jumping on the bandwagon, Victorian England going full-on ghost hunter mode. What a wild ride.
Yeah.
But what about today? Is spiritualism still a thing?
No, it's definitely still around, even if it's not as mainstream as it was back in the day. You can see its legacy in so many ways, from those ghost hunting shows we talked about earlier to the ongoing fascination with mediums and psychic readings. And let's not forget the impact it had on the development of parapsychology, which is the scientific study of psychic phenomena.
That's fascinating. So even though spiritualism might not be making front-page news these days, it's still out there, shaping how we think about life, death, and everything in between.
Absolutely. You know what I find really interesting? It's how spiritualism taps into this very human need, that longing to connect with loved ones who've passed on, to find comfort when we're grieving, to explore those big questions about what happens after we die.
Yeah, it's like we're wired to search for something beyond the everyday, something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And spiritualism offers a way to do that, to maybe tap into a source of wisdom and guidance that goes beyond our limited understanding.
It's almost like trying to peek behind the curtain of reality to get a glimpse of what's really going on.
It is. And even if you're skeptical of all the spirit communication stuff, you can't deny that spiritualism raised some really important questions about consciousness, about the afterlife, about the nature of reality itself. It challenged people to think differently.
It's funny, we started this whole deep dive talking about rapping, ghosts, and seances, and now we're talking about the nature of reality and consciousness. That's how you know it's a good topic when it takes you to unexpected places.
Right. And it makes you wonder, what is it about spiritualism that continues to fascinate us, even in this age of science and technology?
You know, I think it's that very human desire to know what happens after we die. Are we just gone? Or is there something more? And if there is something more, can we connect with it? Spiritualism offers that possibility, even if it's just a possibility, that those connections might exist.
It's a powerful idea. Whether you're a believer or a skeptic, spiritualism forces you to confront those big questions about life, death, and what might be beyond.
Well said. So, to all our listeners out there, have you ever had an experience that made you question what's real, or maybe even consider the possibility of spiritualism? Hit us up on social media, share your stories. We'd love to hear them.
And remember, whether you're a skeptic or a believer, the questions spiritualism raises are still relevant today. They encourage us to think critically, to challenge our assumptions, and to remember that there's still so much we don't know about this world and what might lie beyond.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into spiritualism. Until next time, keep exploring the forbidden unveiled. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next spooky adventure.
Yeah, it really makes you think you know about how much we still don't know, and how much is still out there to discover.
Right, and it also makes you think you know about what draws us to these topics in the first place.
For sure. I mean, we started off talking about these spooky rapping ghosts and mysterious seances, and now we're having these deep conversations about consciousness and the nature of reality.
It's amazing how these things can kind of spiral out of control in a good way. I mean,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like the more you dig into this stuff, the more questions you end up having. And that's what I love about spiritualism. It really pushes you to think outside the box, to consider possibilities you might not have even thought about before.
Yeah, it's like we as humans, we're always searching for answers, especially when it comes to the big questions, the really big ones, like what happens after we die? Is there some kind of afterlife? Is there some greater purpose to it all?
And for a lot of people, spiritualism offers a glimmer of hope, a possibility that there might be more to the story than what we can see and touch.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's that hope that keeps us coming back for more, keeps us asking questions and searching for answers, even when we know those answers might be just out of reach.
And even if you're not a believer, even if you're a hardcore skeptic, there's still something undeniably fascinating about the history of spiritualism and the impact it's had on our culture.
Oh, absolutely. It's a story full of colorful characters and wild events. And it really speaks to this deep-seated human desire to connect with something bigger than ourselves, to explore the unknown.
It's true, and I think that's what makes this topic so enduring, so captivating. It touches on something very primal within us, this need to make sense of the world around us and our place in it.
Yeah, well said. So, to all our listeners out there, have you ever had an experience that made you question your reality or maybe even consider the possibility of spiritualism? We'd love to hear your stories. So be sure to hit us up on social media and share your thoughts.
And remember, whether you're a skeptic or a believer or somewhere in between, keep an open mind, keep asking questions, and never stop exploring the mysteries of the forbidden unveiled.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of spiritualism. And as always, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on our next spooky adventure.